As always, it's lovely to see all your faces. So I'm Adeline from Change It All, and I'll be your moderator. Let me first start by sharing a little bit about us for those of you who don't know. We are Change It All, and as you can guess from our name, we're a boutique consulting firm that specializes in change and transformation. We partner and work with clients in various industries from all over the world. As artificial intelligence transforms the way that we work, lead, and make decisions, aligning strategy with technology design becomes essential for businesses to build ethical, purposeful, and sustainable outcomes. And today, we'll be having a candid conversation with Filiz Basil Small and Dr. Dieter Feltzman about how strategy, culture, and design thinking converge to create intelligent systems that reflect people-driven organizational values. Welcome to our panel series, Conversations on Change. Let's find out more about our guest experts now. Formerly the Program Director of Azure at Microsoft, Customer Experience Partner and High Performance Computing, as well as Artificial Intelligence. Filiz is the first woman to be a worldwide COVID-5 certified assessor. Hi, Filiz. It's good to have you here with us. Actually, Filiz has been a very kind supporter of this panel series, and we've really enjoyed seeing her as a recurring audience participant. So welcome to this side of the panel today, Filiz.
Thank you very much, Adeline. Thanks for having me today.
It's good to have you with us. Our next expert, Dr. Dieter Feltzman, is an award-winning expert in organizational psychology and human resources with a distinguished career in strategic human resources, organizational design and development. Hi, Dieter. So glad that you can join us. Welcome.
Good day, Adeline and Filiz and the rest of the people joining today. Lovely to be with you and looking forward to engaging conversation.
Yes, we're looking forward to having this conversation, Dieter. The convergence of human strategy and AI design is no longer a future aspiration and has become today's leadership challenge. As our future of work and leadership landscape are in the midst of redesign, how do we ensure that the element of human insight stays at the center of design? So today we'll discuss how organizations can build AI capabilities that enhance rather than replace human potential. We'll explore how leaders can balance innovation with intention, ensuring that technology enhances rather than replaces what makes us human. So let's start by setting up the scene. As AI adoption accelerates, where do you both see the biggest gaps between human intent and technological implementation? I'm really interested to know what both of you think, actually. So who would like to start us off? Shall we go with ladies first? Filiz, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. Thanks. I think this is a single topic. Maybe it's it will define the strategy moving forward, how we will proceed it. So what is my approach on that is how the organizations, whether they are technology providers, which is we call them AI enablers, versus the AI consumers who is consuming the AI products, portfolios, and how they see these differences moving or transitioning from traditional AI to the human-centered AI. I think this is the hidden questions every organization needs to ask to themselves before to take step forward. And of course, there is always a challenge and there are always impediments when we start to this journey. First of all, for the human perspective, if they are behind this technology, if they are behind adapting to this technology, understanding what is in it for them, it's the enterprises or the organization's responsibilities bridging the AI skill and gaps. So this is still the factor needs to be considered. And of course, change management and the cultural change in the organizations is another aspect and another hurdle while we are moving towards this journey. And still, there is a discussions, maybe the third topic I would like to emphasize, reducing the bias, hallucinations, and the data reliability related issues we will anticipate during that road. And of course, there are lots of underlying topics, which is data privacy, reducing duplications, and cybercrime, governance, etc. And also overcoming the integrations and the scalability related challenges will still cause this kind of misunderstanding or misalignment between human and the technology side of it. So this is a couple of topics or the headlines I would like to give. I'm happy to go deeper in any of those.
Well, thanks for that, Filiz. We're really going right in from the beginning. Dieter, anything to add to this?
Yeah, I think to build on what Filiz has mentioned, for me, there's a couple of things that stand out at the moment, right? I think the first principle is if you are viewing AI transformation in your organization as a technology transformation initiative, I think you're missing the boat completely. I think aligned to what Filiz has mentioned, it's definitely a lot more about a culture and way of work and the way that we think work happens in the organization type of transformation. So in that context, to get your question around where I believe that there is still some misalignment, and definitely agree with Phyllis on the points that she mentioned. For me, there's three big buckets there. And I think the first one is definitely around, call it the governance and technological bucket. I think there's still a lot of things for organizations to figure out that relates to, data, where we utilize it, what does technology stacks, etc., look like. The one for me, talking from a human resource point of view, which is a lot more interesting, is the second bucket, really around the fact that how do we bring people along this particular change? There is still a lot of fear out there, as Phyllis has mentioned. There's still a lot of misunderstanding, really, of what AI is and where we will utilize it and what it's going to do and the impact that it is really going to have in terms of future work models. And then the third bucket for me is then around the real question around business value and the models of the future. So for me, that relates a little bit more towards this question where how do we start shifting, especially when we start talking generative AI, away from just individual adoption that I think is great for individual productivity, but actually shift it into a way of work, into our workflows, our processes, and the ways that teams work together. Because I think if we don't make that shift, AI is always going to be novel and we'll get value up to a point, but it's not fundamentally, I think, going to disrupt and transform the organization as what its promise looks like for the future. So in my head, it's kind of those three buckets, and I think they interlink and interplay, but it is about taking a much more holistic approach and not being siloed and driving it as a joint initiative, I think, between technology, human resources, risk, legal, and then definitely strategy in the organization.
That's very well put. And actually, I think it's precisely what you're saying. It's and also what Felice was saying, building on that again. That's where a lot of the misalignment comes from, right? So we definitely have to work against that by integrating all the components together, as you said, and not just work inside in a way that is siloed. So building on what you both have said, because there are some overlaps in what you've both added to this question, I would like to move on to the next question, which is, back to the crux of our topic today, because we've mentioned, very human qualities like resistance and fear, right? But what else does it mean to keep, the human at the center of AI design, and not the negative aspects, but the qualities that we do want to retain? What qualities of human judgment do you think would be most critical to retain at the center of AI design, both practically and not just philosophically? So Phyllis, maybe we can go back to you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, of course, there are some guiding principles applies here, not to exclude the human from the center of the AI. And however, we need to carefully adapt an approach to these design principles, because sometimes the design and principles will be seen by the human as a threatening factor. That's why embedding this to the culturally right time through the right resources, right subject matter of experts will be the key success point. And this is how we see also what we do is actually when we are implementing the design principles, we will say that yes, there are dimensions as always, like the transparency, accountability, fairness, and the privacy. However, each of those is also kind of guiding principles for us. First of all, empathy and understanding the users. Is it exist? Or if it is not exist, or there is a doubt around it, how we go deep dive and how we enhance to genuinely address those problems and building an empathy across the organizations, like while we are building the bridge. And also some ethical considerations and the bias mitigation is the key while we are designing these algorithms and understanding the approach and providing the full transparency to the organizations. And when I say this subject matter of experts during the design discussions, it's the user involvement to the design process. Why we need this? Because those people who are the key adopters, who will be the key adopters of the technology, and they will create a value and they will introduce the business outcomes to this outcome of the technology. And of course, accessibility and inclusiveness, this is one of the area I would like to reiterate the importance of it, because none of the human are equal. Yes, we are equal, but some of us delays to adoption, some of us needs more technology enablers will be available for us to perform our daily task and daily operations. That's why accessibility and inclusiveness is very important. I mentioned the transparency. It doesn't mean that we will declare what we are doing, we will disclose the data, etc. But however, for human curiosity needs to be addressed during these design discussions. And later on, when we start producing the, first of all, like minimal viable product, do we take a feedback? And do we make this the part of the continuous feedback and improvement, etc.? So we need to balance between automations and human control. This is how I see the design factor will involve and putting the human at the center of these discussions.
I really agree with a lot of the things that you've said, Filiz. It really, really resonates, and totally agree about, those qualities that are so importantly human, right? Like empathy and uniqueness. That's what would really be the differentiator and so critical for us to retain. And a lot of what you've mentioned ties back to, culture from the HR perspective. So, Dr. Felsman, I'm really interested to know your take on this now.
Yeah, I think definitely, and I mean, if you think about culture as kind of the way that things get done in the organization and the beliefs that we have, I think to really tie into what Filiz has mentioned, when we start thinking about keeping the human at the center, I think there's a couple of ways to do that. The one is definitely in the way that we approach AI, which I think talks to the design process, how we involve people, how do we include people, how do we take feedback. I think there's also a very significant behavioral side of things that we need to bear in mind, right? In terms of what are the human qualities that would actually serve us well in the course of the AI transformation. There's some really interesting research coming out at the moment around things like critical thinking and its importance. So how do I utilize a lot of these outputs? How do I think systemically through what is actually happening when we start thinking about these AI tool sets? And then I think empathy has already been mentioned, and I want to take that one step further almost around saying that also realizing that there is, it's something that I often talk to organizations about. There's a real human being at the end of all these policies, processes, automations, AI implementations that we are doing. And what is this changing around what their experience and their belief of work is going to be like? I think really that narrative also that Filiz has mentioned around the fact that AI is augmenting in the organization, but to do that, it has to be co-created by everyone. There's some interesting data that tells the story about the fact that for AI transformation and adoption to be successful, it can't just be a top-down process. It actually has to also be a bottom-up process where people get familiar with it, they see its value, they start taking ownership thereof, and then also accountability for its outcomes, because I believe that that's going to be a fundamental thing. What we shouldn't do, and I know that's not what you asked, but maybe to give the counter argument there, is to almost outsource our humanness and our cognitive abilities to AI and then just assume that AI will do the work and we sit back. That's not what I think we should be trying to do. It's a lot more about teaching people what we call AI fluency, and that's like learning a new language, right? It's when you think about a new language, you need to learn vocabulary, I need to learn grammar, I need to learn nuance. So it's about teaching people AI fluency around how do I converse and work with these tool sets as part of and as an extension of myself. And to do that, I think the qualities that we need to celebrate and highlight is the fundamental human ones: critical thinking, curiosity, empathy, feedback, and I think continuous sharing with others around it's okay. And this is such a big revolution that not everybody knows absolutely everything. This is a social movement that we need to take forward. And I think to do that, there's actually those interpersonal qualities of human beings taking each other along this particular journey that I think is going to be vital for success.
There's so much good stuff to be found from that answer, and it really also resonates even with what Filiz was saying before. And AI fluency, that term, because I think when we talk about culture, it's not just organizational culture of humans, but now we have to sort of mix in that AI fluency into the culture as well. And I really like what you said, Dieter, about critical thinking being really important. So it's not just about how we are using AI as an aid for ourselves in our lives, in our work, in the organization, in our place in the organization, but also how we are really thinking critically, like as though we're working with a coworker, right? Because that's basically what's going to happen next. And speaking about different types of culture, how we use it, because previously you had said, how we use it individually is very different from how the organization adopts AI, the use of AI. I'd like to talk about, within the organization now. So when we are in the organization and we talk about strategy, we also talk about innovation and risk. But how do we balance innovation and risk when these strategic decisions are increasingly influenced by data and algorithms?
I think from my perspective, I think the starting point there is when we look at strategic decisions, there is obviously, and it will be influenced a lot, and we've been on this data and evidence-driven movement for a number of years, right? When we want to start making better decisions, we want more data to be able to influence that. I think what we sometimes negate a bit there is that human intuition, human experience is also a data point that needs to be brought into the boardroom when we consider these types of things. Because what I worry about is AI is not great yet at nuance. It's not great at context. It's not great at necessarily seeing the things that do not automatically connect through the patterns that it can pick up in its data. So I think there's a fundamental lens that we need to teach people to be skeptic of what they get and to be questioning and querying it so that that sense making can happen when we start making strategic decisions and balancing that with innovation. I think the point that Filiz was also making really around the fact that it depends on where the risks are defined and the risks for who, I think is going to be really, really important. What I mean by that is I think there's definitely, like organizational reputation risks, so things that we should do or should not do, and what is our view and our stance on that and how clear are we? And then secondly, also, you want to get right that there's certain principles that everybody adopts in the organization that they immediately know what is it that I do, what is it that I don't do, to actually inform their decision-making in the right possible manner and in the right way. So I think it's a little bit of a balance there as well. But again, for me, it is about not just taking the data and the algorithms and the decisions and the outputs at face value, but it's about seeing it in the context, being questioning about that, being curious about that, and saying, but hang on, there's actually a connection here that looks very, very different. And what do I then do with that insight, and how do I apply it in a particular context? So to summarize, it's not for me about viewing these things in isolation and standing alone, but it's kind of pulling them slightly closer together and kind of just viewing them in that in that particular context. And I see we
again, tying back to what you were saying before, right, about the critical thinking and really just questioning everything and what makes humans really unique and differentiated, the fact that we should be curious, we should be questioning and applying that kind of critical thinking and knowing that even at the other end of the AI spectrum is, again, that human connection that we can find once more. Filiz, we would love to hear your take on this question now.
To me, again, my humble approach is there is always the risk whenever we take an action. And to mitigate around this risk, what we have accepted and what we delegate and how we delegate and how human will continue safely, securely, without fear on this journey is important. To do this, we need some technological guardrails as well as some psychological guardrails around it. Because we know that technology is moving faster because of the competition in the market, etc. However, human side of it, by the time they adopt, they might see that this is change. Now they need to readapt for the new things. So this creates really a fear and psychological problems and creates another risk for the organizations. Not only the organizations consuming AI, however, the organizations building AI products to be consumed. That's why this is, to me, is, although I call it small steps, however, it's the secure steps. To secure one by one and to judge it, to validate it, revalidate it, and to make sure that from the beginning to the end, what are the checkpoints, what are the control points we will implement together to mitigate this risk. And there should be always, to me, technological way of securing the human in that role and make sure that the data we are continuously putting to create data AI products for the human to consume needs to be really, really very well controlled and very well checked before we say anything. Otherwise, I am hearing lots of hallucinations where people trust the products, when people trust to use it, to consume it in daily. However, when the subject matter experts lately involved and realize that no, this is not done yet, and the results produced by these products needs to be checked, this is what are the risks happening. And in that sudden risks, we may not be able to address it quickly. So we really need to approach with the critical thinking and design thinking and putting every safe elements to make sure that this is done. And definition of done needs to be really discussed carefully with the technology provider, with the internal organizations, and needs to be validated by the human. If human validates, they put their heart and they put their all efforts to make sure that this will be the helpful product. This is how I see the iterations, continuous improvement, and the checking and make sure that, yes, this is done. This is something I trust. And it will be my first version to reach out to different version of this product, what we are doing.
That's a really, really good advice and really an answer worth waiting for. It was completely worth it. So it's what you were talking about, right? Like it's a reiterative process. It's not just coming to a standstill. And I like what you've talked about, especially with the psychological guards we need to put into place, as well as keep having those checkpoints in order to have it be a process of continuous improvement. And completely agree, design thinking, as a matter of fact, is created to have that very human perspective at the heart of it to begin with. So it's important not to lose sight of that. And now I would like to know Dieter's perspective, talking about, again, within the organization context, organizational strategy, and the organizational culture, what frameworks or guiding principles would you recommend, would you advise that could really help to ensure that AI initiatives still stay aligned within the organizational purpose and human judgment?
I think that's a great question, Adelina, around the fact that I think the moment that we start seeing AI as something separate, as an enabler to get us to our purpose, I think you start running into trouble. And I think that's what we need to be very careful of, is to own the narrative as an organization around how is AI going to enable us to become our reason for existence. And I think if people don't connect that, I think then they start running into, oh, but AI is here too. And then you can kind of insert whatever you want to there, right? To replace, to take away, as opposed to there to enable, to enhance, to allow us to achieve our potential. Now, you asked the question around frameworks, and I think there's a lot of frameworks out there on culture. The best definition of culture that I've ever heard is culture in an organization is what we tolerate and what we celebrate. It's the things that we say yes to, it's the things that we say no to, and it's the things that we accept as being what and the way that we do certain things. Now, I start there because I think you need to have a conversation as a leadership team around what are our non-negotiables going to be? So what are the things that we will never compromise on? And that goes beyond just your statements of values that you have. It has to be really, really practical things that is crystal clear and say, in our AI adoption journey, these are the things that we will never compromise on. We will never say yes to X. We will never say no to X. And I think that allows the conversation in the organization to be a lot more about the explainability, the purpose of behind our AI adoption and where we want to utilize it. And if you do that and you're very clear about that, I think it helps people to then connect to AI as something that enables us to get to our purpose, as opposed to something that stands in the way and it's something that should be feared. So for me, again, it's bringing it together, telling that story, telling that narrative. And I think if there's one thing that leaders can do on the culture front is help employees make sense of the transformation, help them understand why this is happening, where this is happening, what is coming next, and be open about that continuous dialogue and that continuous conversation.
That is really great. And actually, it goes back again to critical thinking, right? Not being afraid to ask those tough questions. What are the non-negotiables, and what can we actually do without, and what can't we do without? And I think that's really important when it comes to making sure that there is alignment. So thanks for that, Dieter. That's really, really good advice. So talking about the flip side, though, what are some real-world examples that maybe both of you would know, where, technology has actually enhanced rather than replaced human decision making? Since we were talking about how it has to enhance it rather than replace it, do you know of any real world examples that maybe we can talk about?
Filiz, up to you.
Thank you very much. So I'm very excited because when it comes to creates a value and it's in use, of course, it was again when we mentioned these success stories, it's created cooperatively by the all the contributors. It's not only the success of the technology, it's the success of the human center of it. So I can give a great examples about, for instance, paperless hospital and the diagnosis and the healthcare organizations. And these are really a great examples which minimize the life impact to the human, as well as increase the capability of the healthcare givers, doctors, nurses, and everything. Those things are still as good success stories around it. And when it comes to also how the organizations or we during the unexpected times, for instance, COVID, what we have done is using the AI capabilities, what is the human most needs to the COVID vaccine, etc. Most of the technological companies cooperated with the distributor global logistic organizations to make sure that they have enabled and they have delivered the COVID vaccines to the consumers, to the people who are waiting. Those are really a great example of accelerating AI and creating and building a value. And today I am excited to see the almost every technology providers saying that one of my customers are enabled the using the workflows efficiency to reduce the approval time of supply chain management. One of them saying that in the car production line, we have embedded these technologies and we have increased the quality assurance process timeline. And we have increased the consumer feedbacks and the customer service organizations saying that I have reduced the time of the responding the customer complaints XYZ. Those are, to me, it's really great examples. We can multiply these. Of course, Dieter will provide more from the area where the internal organizations, human resource departments will integrate the AI to help them from the healthy recruitment process to the life cycle of the human in the organizations. But I am really excited to see these examples and happy to provide more. But those are the tops on my mind.
Thank you for that. Those are very relatable examples for sure. Is there anything to add?
Yeah, maybe three quick stories, right, in terms of examples, and I'll speak a bit more from the HR domain, and I'm going to start with one where it actually didn't happen, because I think that's also important. If you think about HR, whenever you ask the question, what is the most subjective process in HR, most people will say performance management. And what an organization tried to do is to say, what we should do? We should replace the manager when giving feedback to the employee by actually AI that can give objective feedback. And that absolutely crashed and burned completely for a couple of reasons. The first one is it's a human connection that we tried to replace there. And the second piece is it turns out that as human beings, even though I might not be doing great, I still prefer to get feedback from a real human being that I can speak to and can engage and interact with me. To the company's credit, they then rolled that back and said, okay, how do we rather use AI to enhance this human interaction between a manager and an employee? They used AI to look at patterns in data. They used AI to create talking points for both parties. They used AI for both the manager and for the employee to be able to kind of practice and rehearse beforehand. And that actually improved the quality of the conversation that they had, which significantly enhanced the value, the quality, the developmental nature of the performance process. So I think what that story tells us is really around the fact that if you're intentional about it, it can augment, but be aware of what you are doing broader. The second quick story is, I think a significant one has been in the career management space, where for the very first time through the use of AI tools, we allow people to understand with the skill sets that I have, how are other opportunities that I might not have thought about actually available for me. If you look at a lot of the talent management platforms these days and the internal mobility platforms, one of the key things we struggle with is people don't know what their own skills are. And two, they think that their skills are only tied to the functional area where you grew up in. So if I ask somebody in HR, what is your skills? I'll say, I'm a recruiter. I can recruit. Okay, that's one of your skills, but you're also great at planning and organizing. You're also great at stakeholder management. You're also great at influencing and negotiating. And I think through the use of AI tools, it can actually allow and enable us to say, with those skills you have, these are 5 career opportunities that you've never thought about that might be your next step if you are able to do the following to be able to get there. And there's some great success stories coming out of that area where AI has helped people make better informed career decisions about possibilities that they never knew about. Last quick one is then also in the space of, I'm a very firm supporter for, I think, coaching. Executive coaching has been something that is extremely valuable for people across their careers. However, it's extremely expensive, and as such, it's not available. And Filiz's point earlier around access. And I think there's some really good stories coming out, especially for entry-level employees actually having the opportunity to utilize AI almost as a first-line coach to say, I'm new to the sales environment. I don't know how to do this. Give me feedback on what is my tone. Give me feedback on how am I doing in this conversation. And that actually manages and gives the opportunity for people that would never have had coaching until much later in their careers to get that from day one. And I think that is magic if you are able to unlock that in the organization.
Thanks for those 3 really comprehensive real-world examples. And I think they were also very relatable, but we would not think of them. And so it's great that you actually brought them up. And I also really liked especially what you said in your first story about things being intentional. And I think that's really the key in making sure that AI enhances rather than replaces is when we're very intentional with our adoption. So I just wanted to ask one last question because I wanted to give enough time for the audience participants to ask their questions if they have any. I'm sure that people are really, really eager to pick your brains and your experience. Looking to the future, because we're talking about AI, what is one, well, the future that's already here, we're already using it, but what's one mindset shift or a leadership habit, either a mindset shift or a leadership habit that you believe is really essential in aligning human strategy with AI design? Our topic title. So who would like to go first? This time, ladies don't need to go first. Whomever wants to go first.
I'll grab this one, and then Phyllis, I'll hand it over to you.
Perfect.
For me, I think some of the things there, it's a mindset of curiosity and experimentation. So really being open to what this could potentially be, because it is disruptive and it is new, and I think you have to stay abreast of that. And Phyllis rightfully spoke earlier about techno stress and overwhelm. So I think as a leader, it's important to stay curious, be open, experiment, make sense of. And I think on the other side, being very comfortable with not knowing. And what I mean by that is, in the uncertainty, we will get value out of the fact if people admit that, oh, this is new. I actually don't quite know what this is going to be able to do. Let me try, let me experiment, let me learn from it. And as leaders, very often we are looked at as somebody to have all the answers, and it is not possible in this new frame of mind. So be pretty open to the fact that you don't know. It's okay for you not to know, but be curious about what could be. And I think that's a habit that you have to actually start bringing into your leadership style, because very often we look to leaders to say, you make the decision, you tell us where to go. Whereas I think in this new world, the leader is going to have to say, where should we go? Let's try this out. Let's see what works. And if not, what do we learn from that, and how do we shift, and how do we move? So that curiosity, that letting go of ego, I think is going to be so important in the leadership models of the future.
That's amazing. And I like that it's super easy for us to remember as well. Basically, just being curious and open to learning and where should we go. And I think it's quite connected to what Filiz was saying right at the beginning as well about transparency, right? Leaders not having to pretend to know everything, but being very open and transparent, not in the way that we just disclose everything and anything, but again, intentional about the transparency. So I really, really love that. Filiz.
Thank you very much. So I think Dieter covered pretty much on this topic. However, just to add more on that, in the same dimension, of course, we are human and we cannot know everything, but we can learn. And to learn it as an organization, as a leadership behavior, we need to encourage our people. And to do this, we need to really cooperate as a leader with our human resources, talent management organizations to define our ASIS. If we know our today's ASIS, where we are, we will be easily digest these technological changes, and we will be easily provide the quick adoption to our resources. So it's time, and it's an opportunity for every organizations, maybe first time ever, human-centered AI brings together the human capitals and the technology. So this is really a great opportunity for the organizations and for all of us. So to do this, what I see is talent management becomes more important and more data provider to the leadership team to create transferable skills, to identify what are their transferable skills and how they augment those skills, because it's no longer one knows and one adopts and one do. It's a collaborative working environment. And the leaders needs to create these 360 organizations to make sure that they get the maximum benefits out of their talents. This is really important, and the leadership needs to observe it and needs to adopt it and they really need to encourage it and implement the metrics. It's not like that meetings, endless meetings, discussions. What are the measurable metrics that organizations not stay behind the AI, not create a fear for their talents, but how they measure their success and how they make sure that their business gets the maximum value out of these technology enablers. So this is my 2 cents here.
Thanks for that, Filiz. And both of you have actually done a great job in condensing this advice into very, very usable and memorable buzz phrases, So I think it would be really, really helpful to all of us here. And I really appreciate it as well, Filiz, you adding that metrics are so important, right? It's not just about when we talk about human-centered AI, we also need to remember how we execute it, how we deliver it, and metrics really does play a big part in that. And so with that, really, really insightful advice. Let's take some time now for questions and comments from the audience. The floor is now open. Please raise your hand via emoticon and we'll call on you. But if you prefer, you may also type your questions in the chat box. Actually, I already am seeing some questions in the chat box. It has been pretty active. And another note is that actually our last question to our expert guests has been put into the chat box too. So if you missed the details in their answers, you can find the summary of their answers in the chat box. So let's go to the first person that that contributed in the chat box is from Abhijit. Please let me know if I'm mispronouncing your name. So I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Abhijit asks, the Turing test is perhaps a measure of how AI is close to its human counterpart. And so how are the popular AI tools doing on that part? For instance, what's the scale of scores from bad ranging to excellent, ranging from bad to excellent? What's the scale of scores which helps in choosing the right AI tool? Who wants to take on that question?
So I can take it. I will try to explain it. Of course, the Turing test is historically is very old, created by Alan Turing in the really early, if my memory serves well, it's 1950s, 1949s, etc. However, this is one of I think, the topics I try to highlight it. Are we in the traditional AI approach or human-centered approach, and how the Turing tests still valid, or what are the Turing tests needs to evolve along with this human-centered technology, proving the technology, is it adaptable? I believe that this is still valid for the conceptual point of view. However, how we are going to measure it needs to evolve and needs to tailor based on the technology or the organizations who will consume this technology. This is my 2 cents here. Again, it's there is no good and bad, or there is no not. There is yes or no. It's the kind of concept. If I take the Turing test, is my conceptual approval. I will do this conceptual approval before I launch this product. It's an approach. However, again, human subject matter of experts and the collaborative subject matter of experts needs to validate it and adopt this test methodology, which is created in the early 50s, where we were having a lack of technologies. That's why I would encourage the organizations to check, validate before they accept that this is purely true.
Thanks for that answer, Filiz. Dieter, would you like to add anything to that?
Of course. So I think agree with Filiz there. I think, context matters. And I think especially today around the progression that we have seen, but also I think the applications of some of these technologies are vastly different than, the 1950s, early 1960s. So I think it is about where you want to utilize it. And I think what is informing, if we start focusing a little bit more on the tool component, what is informing what you want to do with it and what is the outcome and the objective going to be? Different tools have got different strengths. I think on the practical side, it is good to know what to use what for in terms of its general strengths and its purpose for which it was developed. And then to put that into the context of you and your organization and where are you now with regards to things like your AI readiness, your AI maturity, and what's going to be the best decision for you to make here within the confines of the controls that you have put down. So I think it's a question that has to go slightly deeper than just what is the right tool set. I think it needs to be what is the right solution in the context of who we are as a business and what we're trying to achieve. And I think that informs decision making. I think tools, as mentioned, like the Turing test, etc., I think, as Filiz has rightfully said, they are helpful instruments that you can utilize, but it's an approach. It's one approach. Every single approach has got limitations and it's got benefits. So put it into the context and what is it that you're trying to answer through this type of approach, I think is going to be important.
Thank you, Dieter, and also Filiz, for both of you contextualizing the question and your answers. That's true, and I'm hearing again that importance of intentionality. So we have another question from Amanda. What are your thoughts on the growing fear that AI will replace humans? That's a variation of one of the questions that we asked, particularly in administrative roles where many positions are already disappearing.
I'll grab this one, to be fair, and then Filiz, I can hand over to you after that. So I think there's a couple of things that we need to do there, right? First, we need to acknowledge that fear is out there. Now, whether that fear is real or not, perception informs truth about these things. And I think the public media is not helping by quoting big numbers of jobs that will be lost. There's also another side to that equation in terms of new jobs that will be created. What I do think is important here is, and as we said earlier, AI is transforming what work is, and we need to think very differently about work design in future. In the past, we've thought about work as jobs and jobs consisting of tasks and activities. And if I am a talented individual, I need to be able to do everything that sits within a job to be able to be proficient. That model has definitely started to change a lot, where we say actually work is a lot of tasks and activities that happen, and people have certain skills that can complement that. And AI can replace some of those tasks and activities. And I think it's a very, very good thing. There was a concept called, and I'm not going to say the full word, but it was called BS jobs, which was written in the 1990s or so, that talks about tasks and activities that have to happen in an organization for the organization to function and be successful. But it's not necessarily tasks that give people meaning in work. So I think the conversation that we should rather have is how can we use AI optimally to take away the work that we don't want human beings to do? And what is it that human beings are good at and what do they want to contribute? Now, I'm not naive enough to say that this is just a philosophical discussion. It has to lead towards us then actually starting actively reskilling people with skill sets and activities and tasks that we think is going to be important going forward and can be augmented by AI and not necessarily replaced. But I think we shouldn't be afraid of that. I think as human beings, we have got immense tenacity and resilience, and we are very innovative, but we are going to have to job craft a bit more in future around putting these different things together. But have that conversation. Don't sweep it under the carpet, because I think people are rightfully afraid of certain things. And if we don't deal with that, that's going to grow into something that we don't want in the organization. But open that up, talk about reskilling, talk about how we reinvest in capacity, and give people the tools that they are able to prepare themselves for a different future. And whether that's through reskilling or exposure or experience, that's the conversation we should be having now.
That's great. Thanks for that, Dieter. And actually, it was a very hopeful and optimistic answer. So thanks for that. Filiz, anything to add?
Thank you very much. So again, I would like to go back to what I have said. Maybe that fear exists and still exists during the traditional AI approach, because it's particularly focused on to automate what human does and create an efficiency. And as a result of that, of course, organizations are the living organizations. They need to change, they need to evolve, they need to rethink, and they need to reshape their organizational structure. That doesn't mean that they will get rid of the resources or they will shrink the resources, etc. So In the human life cycle management, this is all the practices. And we need to accept, this is one of the constants we need to accept first before we say that AI replacing me. But what we need to do is, this is again the baseline approach, which leadership team needs to aware of to minimize this fear of the human, that whatever we implement would help you and you will be center of it. And this can only happen with the transforming the human resources and the talent we have in our hands. So that's why I would like to call this, rather than replacing, transforming the way of we are doing the things, because we need to transform. If we think about, like I would like to give an example, before COVID, even we don't know how we work collaboratively because tools were not exist. We didn't have enough tools to bring together all the remote people sitting in their home in the different areas, access to the tools, etc. But we human has seen this is a needs and we have provided. Same applies to the administrator roles. For instance, if the people in the administrative roles thinking that this will shrink and this will exclude them from the organizations, what are my different skill set then AI cannot replace? I think organizations need to start discussing around it, because AI cannot replace human while it is created by human. But it will help, it will enable, and it will encourage the people to change themselves and to explode themselves in the different way than they are today. So this is how I see as a positive things. Of course, there might be organizations need to restructure their companies, etc. This is up to them. But AI shouldn't be the main reason of that.
Thanks for that, Filiz. I love that both your answers are so positive and hopeful, and talking about just being open, as well as that reiterative kind of way of thinking and looking at things. So we have about 5 minutes left in the session, and I think we have time for one last question. This is from Alkadir. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. How do you account for the fact that human strategy is often implicit, based on culture and intuition, while AI design requires explicit, quantifiable objectives? Oof, this is a tough one. Who is going to take this on?
I'll jump in there. I think the
Perfect.
first thing we need to acknowledge there is that, I think the profession of human resources, especially over the last 10 to 15 years, have actually become a lot more evidence-based, become a lot more data-driven. There's a lot more around things like people analytics that we utilize to have both qualitative and quantifiable data points that informs our decision-making there. So I think, Alkadir, and apologies if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. I think what is important is to first rather question then the process and the practice that informs our people strategy. Because I think the people domain, the human resource domain, there is actually a lot of really good models, predictive and otherwise, and data points that you can utilize to inform what your human strategy is going to be in the future. So I would say you need to go back towards the fact to say, but how can I make the best possible decision with the data and the information that I have? How do I then bring that to the table in terms of how AI design is going to influence that and where that fits as part of my broader people strategy? And how do I then continuously iterate and learn more as I do go along? So I think it is about shifting the approach that, I think 10, 15 years ago, there was very much an approach to say, we don't understand human beings well enough to be able to quantify certain data points to inform what we do and what we don't do. I don't believe that is no longer the case. It then means that the way that you are surfacing that data points to make those decisions is not working.
I see that we've gotten a thumbs up from Akadir, so I think it's like, oh, and we've gotten another thumbs up. So that was a good answer. Filiz, anything to add?
So I would like to again emphasize on the approach, how we will translating the technical outcomes, expectations, measurements with the human-centered outcomes. So we we really need to not to lose in the translating of those both, where we say that yes, if we look at the human, it needs to be implicit based on culture, intuitions, etc. However, there is always a matrix matching between those. It doesn't necessarily to be one to one. It needs to be one to many, many to one, etc. However, this is one of the leadership principles needs to apply. So there might be not a loss in the translation, and this will create the measurable outcomes for the all parties. So if I look at the technological dimensions, I will see this in the quantifiable measurements outcomes. If I look at the human-centered approach, I will see how does that match with the other elements. So this is really important questions. I like this question a lot. This is how make the human-centered AI more important than ever to me.
Absolutely. Thank you for that answer as well, Filiz. And thank you for all the really good questions. Totally agree. It's by asking these really important, good questions that we get the really important, good answers. And with that, we have 1 minute to the end of our session. So I'll use this time to say thank you, everyone, for joining us for another session of Conversations on Change. Please do give another round of applause for our guest experts today, Dr. Dieter Veltzman and Filiz Basil Small. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for
And we
having
have
us.
some really encouraging
Thank you,
comments in
Ron.
the chat box as well from our guest participants. So that's really, really heartening to see. Thank you so much. For those who would like to revisit this conversation, please do visit our Change at All pages on Facebook and LinkedIn, where we will have posts of the recording. So do like and follow us if you haven't already to get more updates. And in the meantime, have a lovely Thursday evening or afternoon for Dr. Dieter and a good start to the weekend ahead.